So the topic was neoadjuvant chemotherapy in head and neck cancer. And then when I started looking at the topic, I realized that normally we speak on oral, but when it's about all head and neck cancer, it won't be possible to cover everything. So I thought that it was that we focus on indications of neoadjuvant chemotherapy in head and neck cancers with what evidence we have and with what regimens we have. So the flow of the class will be we will talk about each side of head and neck cancer and the advantages of NSAID, what it offers in terms of either organ preservation or the improvement in outcomes, whichever way, or if there's no benefit. So we start from nasopharynx. Now we all know that nasopharynx as a subsite differs with respect to other head and neck cancers, like it has a high chances of having lymphatic spread. Also, it is one of the head and neck cancer associated with distant metastasis. So it's always was felt that induction chemotherapy would be successful much more successful in nasopharynx than any other head and neck cancers. We now have around 3 to 4 articles, which I would focus on this first article in New England Journal of Medicine, which compared in nasopharyngeal cancers, induction chemotherapy with gemcitabine and cisplatin versus induction chemo followed by CTRT versus CTRT alone. And it conclusively proved that with respect to every endpoint of recurrence-free survival or distance recurrence-free survival, there was a benefit of overall survival, and this benefit of overall survival was majorly related to a decrease in the distance recurrence, which was seen in cancer. Now, one other thing which always hampers the use of induction chemotherapy is that the perceived fear that people who get induction chemotherapy cannot go on to receive further local therapy, either it be CTRT or with surgery. And what you could see here that in both arms, whether they were for CTRT arm or for the induction arm, nearly 100% of the patients could start. And in fact, the patients completing the RT was higher in the induction chemotherapy arm than in the standard therapy. That's suggesting that this fears may be true a few decades back, but now that we have learned how to manage the side effects with induction chemotherapy, we are much better prepared when it comes to managing local therapy after induction chemotherapy. The first trial which I spoke about was with induction when used at gemcitabine and cisplatin. This is another interesting study which came from the same university, Sanyati University, and it was presented by led by Dr. Sun. And what it was showed was again induction chemotherapy versus concurrent chemotherapy. The induction which was used here was a TPF regimen, that's docetaxel, cisplatin, and 5-FU. A modified TPF was used as opposed to what we use at Tata, which is the classic TPF of TAX 323, in which the dose of docetaxel, cisplatin, and 5-FU in the classic is a 75, 750 milligram per meter square. While in the induction used in this study, it was 60, 66, 600. So there was around a 15% reduction, 15 to 20% reduction in the dose of TPF. And what was interesting in this study that again, when you look at what you see here is the same trend what you see in the paper with gemcitabine and cisplatin. There is an improvement in overall survival. There's an improvement in failure-free survival, and this is largely due to a decrease in distant metastasis rates, which are seen with addition of induction chemotherapy. Do we at Tata do? Yeah, we have been doing induction chemotherapy at in TMH for a long time, and this is our own experience of around 201 patients, which shows that yeah, induction chemotherapy is even feasible in Indian setting, and we have been using the TPF regimen for this. So in nasopharyngeal cancers, in locally advanced nasopharyngeal cancers, that is any node positive or stage 3 and stage 4 nasopharyngeal cancers, neoadjuvant chemotherapy as it stands today is the first recommendation, and it improves both overall survival and progression-free survival. So if you want to know about nasopharynx, in nasopharynx, induction chemotherapy followed by chemoradiation at present is a standard recommendation. With that, we'll move to oral cancer. Now, when we talk about oral cancers, we can't get away without doing a surgery. And this is a very interesting study, and we need to read this study. This is a study done by Dr. Iyer et al., and these are the 10-year results. In this study, resectable head and neck cancers were randomized into two groups. One received surgery followed by H1RT, and the second received chemoradiation. And this is the whole results of the whole cohort, where you see that, okay, there is a slight advantage in numerically, doesn't have statistical significance for OS or for DFS when overall head and neck cancer is seen. But when you dissect out these results for oral cancers, and another site was maxilla, in which similar results were seen, you could see that in locally advanced resectable oral cancers, surgery followed by adjuvant had a huge benefit over chemoradiation. Median survival in the chemoradiation arm was as low as around 10 to 12 months. What it shows is that, or the data is trying to tell us, is that oral cancer is not a very radiation sensitive tumor, and a locally advanced resectable oral cancer needs to be resected and given adjuvant RT after that. Now, we must understand that when you say resection, the resection is actually a spectrum. You would have few tumors which are clearly resectable. You would have few tumors which are in the shade of black, which is clearly they are unresectable. But in that falls a group which is borderline resectable. And how do you define borderline resectability? It actually is variable from surgeon to surgeon, varies from institute to institute. It's kind of an overlap where you feel that the resections are going to be too morbid for that prognosis. And this is beautifully seen in this article by Kraft, where multiple surgeons or people who are involved in head and neck were asked if these are the functions which are going to be lost. Like for example, if you have to do total glossectomy plus supraglottic laryngectomy, how many of you would prefer to do surgery? And you could see that those in blue are saying yes, those in red are saying no. And you could see that when you had surgeries like total glossectomy with laryngectomy, such huge surgeries, most of the peoples across the globe won't operate for this patient because they feel that the function loss is unacceptable in this patient. And second, why is the function loss unacceptable? The function loss is unacceptable because to get a clear margin, you have to resect the nearby organs either completely or partially, which makes this surgeries too morbid. So there are multiple criteria which are given for saying what is a borderline resectable. We at Tata follow the criteria which I am going to show, which says that if the tumor extends, it should actually peritoneal edema extends above the level of zygoma, then it starts to get interference in the high infratemporal spaces where resections are very difficult. Secondly, if the tumor extends up to the hyoid, most of the time you require laryngeal surgeries and hyoid resections for that, which again makes it a very tough situation. So how we go about this in borderline resectable head and neck cancer? This has been our paradigm for nearly now for last 18 years now, that we discuss them in joint clinic. If they fit in this criteria, we give a neoadjuvant chemotherapy. If they respond, depending on the response, if they have become operable, we undergo surgery. If no, we may offer radical CTRT. And if not, they would get palliative treatment. Now, after doing neoadjuvant chemotherapy, how many patients of borderline resectable oral cancers will get operated? The number varies from between 40 to 50%. Sometimes it can go as low as 35% if you have been very over ambitious with it. But it's clear that patients who undergo surgery after this kind of scenarios do better. And if they undergo surgery followed by complete adjuvant treatment, they do much better. So the treatment here is not only giving neoadjuvant treatment and seeing that the patient undergoes surgery, but after that they need to undergo adjuvant treatment also. Now let's put these outcomes in perspective. Unfortunately, borderline resectable cancers is a problem of India, and there have not been many randomized studies on this. So this is some institutes prefer to do surgery as extensive as one. And I'm showing you some data from India itself on very advanced borderline treatable cancers, which similar to what we have been using. And if you look at upfront surgery results, have a look at this average time to recurrence. You could see that the maximum time to recurrence was 6 months. And the minimum was around 2 months. That most of the patients, when you do a very extensive surgery in this, do recur early. The question becomes is, can you offer radical CTRT in them? And now quite a few of you would be radiation oncologists in the crowd, and those who are not, you must understand that when you have such extensive tumors, this kind of gross tumor volume with their extensive microscopic are just impossible to be treated. And if there is bone infiltration, then it becomes very difficult to give radiation in this situation, and there is a very high risk of osteoradionecrosis in that. In Tata, we have attempted in some patients giving radical CTIT and borderline resectable cancers. This is very few number because we are proponent of surgery, so we do neoadjuvant chemotherapy, but often across we come across patients who don't want neoadjuvant chemotherapy, are not willing, and we have offered them. And you could see that the median survival in such patient is around 6 months, which is nearly similar to what you would have achieved by doing an upfront surgery. And the take-home message is that borderline resectable oral cancer is a one situation in which if you give neoadjuvant chemotherapy, this improves outcomes. This is a very situation where even trying to administer radical CTIT or upfront surgery in large series have shown to have very dismal outcomes. So for oral cancers, the indication. Hello. The oral cancers, the indication for NICT is the borderline resectable. Now let's jump on to another site, hypopharynx. Now understand that hypopharynx is a site which has the high, after nasopharynx, the highest evidence for using neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Now let's, before I go and dissect the trials for you for hypopharynx, understand that the hypopharynx, one of the primary objective of neoadjuvant chemotherapy is organ preservation. And what organ we are trying to preserve? We are trying to preserve the larynx. Now, the definition of larynx preservation has evolved. The initial definitions which were taken in the studies were rudimentary and which have now become very sophisticated and which are more logical also now. So like, for example, the initials, what I would place and call them as generation 1 studies, went with a definition that larynx preservation is absence of laryngectomy. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that there are 100 patients and you did some organ preservation therapy. Out of these 100 patients, if 60 patients, the larynx has no disease and is functioning well. Okay, larynx is preserved in them. In 10 more patients, the larynx is not functioning, but there is no disease. This also is considered as larynx preservation. In 10 more patients, there is recurrence, but the patient refuses to undergo laryngectomy. This also in this definition is considered as larynx preservation. In 10 patients, the larynx has disease and the patient died with that disease. This also is considered larynx preservation according to definition. Only in those last 10 patients in which a laryngectomy had to be performed would be considered as larynx not preserved. So you could, when I was giving you these examples, you would have thought that these are very illogical examples, but this is what actually has happened in literature. Larynx preservation means in initial generation 1 studies that there's absence of laryngectomy. If a patient has residual tumor in the larynx, is not willing for his surgery and is laid to rest in a coffin, he goes with a preserved larynx according to that definition. Now, there have been, obviously, people have thought about it and people have been concerned about this definition of larynx preservation. And now there is a larynx preservation new definition, which also sounds with larynx esophageal dysfunction-free survival. It says that if the patient dies because if the patient dies, we would consider the larynx not preservation. If patient has a residual disease, we would consider this larynx not preserved. If patient has a salvage laryngectomy, we would consider larynx not preserved. And there's an interesting aspect to it. If because of the larynx preservation therapy, there have been side effects which are too exhaustive, like the patient requires a tracheostomy or patient requires a feeding tube for 2 years or later, it would also be considered as larynx not preserved. So this is the other end of the spectrum, where there is a comprehensive definition of larynx preservation. But most of the data, all of the data which I'm going to show you is with the definition 1, that is the rudimentary definition of larynx preservation, and let's keep that in mind. One of the first initial studies was done for the GOTEC group, 202 patients of pyriform sinus. What they did was they gave chemotherapy in 1 hour, 3 cycles of induction therapy. Only and only if there was a CR, this is where it differs from larynx, only and only if there was a complete response, then the patient underwent radiation, or else the patient was treated with surgery. Otherwise, all patients were treated with surgery. And this is the line for induction chemotherapy, and this is the line for What you see here is that if you read the abstract of this article, or if you read the gist of this article, it would always be written that they had similar outcomes. No, they didn't have similar outcomes. They had similar outcomes at the end of the study. But if you look at the median survival, there was an improvement with the addition of induction chemotherapy from a median of 2 years to 4 years, and this P was 0.006. So induction chemotherapy in hypopharynx, at least for the first 5 years, led to an improvement in outcomes, which obviously merged after that. And I'll show you that this always merges in head and neck cancer. And it was also able to preserve larynx. Let's say this was the rudimentary larynx vision definition. The 3-year chances of your larynx being preserved was 42%. At the end of 5 years was 35%. Now, what about this long-term survival? Though there was a separation in the curve of survival, as I showed you earlier, after 5th years, this curve will merge, and these are both going together. So the 5-year and 10-year survival rates in patients who had preserved larynx was 21.9% and 8.7%. And this difference of 21 versus 8.7 versus 42 of 35%, like 5-year larynx preservation is 35%, but the chances of survival is 21.9% is because of the rudimentary definition of larynx preservation. So what do we see with respect to hypopharynx? The take-home message is this is the site which is the maximum evidence is for induction chemotherapy. Induction chemotherapy with cisplatin 5, if there is a CR or a very good partial response, then you should consider giving the patient chemoradiation. If no, the patient should undergo surgery. This in the short interval of time up to 5 years leads to an improvement in survival, but at the end of 10 years, the survival, whichever way you choose, remains the same. If you use induction chemotherapy at the end of 5 years, 35% of the patients would have the larynx preserved, and there is still, I would say, a dismal survival in these patients. Now let's go to larynx per se. Now for larynx, again, the definition, the same definition issues are there, which were there in hypopharynx. Now we won't go into details of this, but the definition again are at present rudimentary for larynx preservation in the studies which I'm going to show you. Now this is another study from Veterans Affairs. Now this is a very similar design to the hypopharynx study done by EORTC, which I showed you before, only is that even if there was a partial response in hypopharynx, only if a CR was there, they allowed you to take the patient for non-surgical treatments. Here it was, even if there was a PR, they allowed you to take for non-surgical treatments. And what they did show was that outcomes were better and you could preserve larynx with this. Now, after the study, induction chemotherapy followed by radiation became kind of a de facto standard. With this RTOG study. In the RTOG study, patients for larynx preservation, and mind you, these are T3N0M0 patients, and they didn't take T4A patients or other patients. T3N0M0 patients we are talking about, where radical radiation versus radical chemoradiation was followed by induction, followed by RT was compared. Now, let's look at these results. This is larynx preservation, and it clearly shows that the best results were obtained with using CTRT, followed by chemotherapy, followed by RT, followed by RT alone. And this was the initial results which got published in New England Journal of Medicine, after which CTRT actually in NCCN changed it. CTRT was placed above induction, followed by radiotherapy. Now, but if you start looking at these results, you see that larynx preservation rate never comes down. Somehow, every patient's larynx which got preserved till 2 years remains on the top. But when you look at larynx-free survival, you could see that, oh, the CTRT patients are dying, but the larynx is preserved. And this is because of the faulty definition of larynx preservation, which was used in the RTOG study, which considered that only and only if laryngectomy was done, the patient was considered as larynx not preserved. If the patient died with a residual disease in the larynx, dysfunctional larynx, it was still considered larynx preserved. And that's the reason that they were all censored. And what does this done? If you look at the 10-year results for laryngectomy-free survival, you could see that this is 47% here, 44% with RT plus induction. Obviously, it's inferior with RT alone. You don't see that if you see larynx position with a rudimentary definition, yes, CTIT looks to be benefit. But when you take a logical definition of larynx preservation, where you mark death as an event, you mark presence of residual disease as an event, as in larynx-free survival, there's no difference. In fact, when you look at the overall survival, you would see that overall survival at 10 years for RT followed by induction, the induction chemotherapy followed by RT is around 40%. As opposed to that for concomitant CTRT is 27.5%. That is nearly 11% lesser than the CTRT induction year. This is not obviously statistically significant, but it started reaching towards statistical significance. RT plus concomitant with RT, you could see it was 0.08. So understand that in laryngeal cancers also, when you use the proper definition of laryngectomy preservation, there is no difference between induction chemotherapy followed by RT versus concurrent CTRT. Second, the induction followed by RT, the late-term side effects are slightly less, which results in a higher 10-year survival in these patients. And hence, both are placed at similarly. So up till now, we have finished nasopharynx, we have finished hypopharynx, we have finished larynx, we have finished oral cancer. Now let's just repeat them. Nasopharynx, definitely in locally advanced nasopharynx, you would give induction chemotherapy. It's a survival benefit. For oral cancers, we would give it for borderline resectable cancer. There is no other methodological choice in these patients for your treatment. Other choices are associated with limited survivals, which the median ranges between 4 to 6 months. For larynx, you have larynx per se, you have both options, CTRT or neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by RT option, but neoadjuvant chemo followed by RT leads to similar amount of laryngectomy-free survival when you take death and residual as an event, and they are also associated with higher overall survivals. For hypopharynx, the larger amount of proof with respect to organ preservation lies only with neoadjuvant chemotherapy. CTRT alone trial in hypopharynx only patients has never been done. Let's look at the other sites in head and neck cancers which also have a neoadjuvant chemotherapy as a role. Let's talk about sinonasal tumors. And we all know that sinonasal tumors are at a site in which the skull base is very near, and these tumors have frequently are of high grade and also leads to high rates of distant metastasis, which is very similar to what we see in nasopharynx. Let's take for this example that this patients, you could see that it has gone intradurally, it has entered the orbit. So such figures are not uncommon in these sinonasal tumors. R0 resections are difficult. If you try to do CTRT, it's too close to the optic now. Orbital preservation remains an issue. Giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy in these patients leads to dramatic responses in most of the patients. And this is not just one-off response which I'm showing you. These patients do much better, and this is our own TMH data which shows that in such patients, any reduction in size is achieved in nearly 80 to 85% of the patients. So sinonasal tumors, especially esthesioneuroblastoma or patients who are SNAC or SNUC, if they are locally advanced, and if this is a site where these are rare tumors, so we are not going to get randomized studies, but these are sites in which induction chemotherapy leads to the job of surgeon easy and has shown to be a very good response rates and beautiful overall survivals also in these patients. Now, this also can be helpful even if it is operable. If you're considering doing an orbital preservation, we have limited data. We have the largest series, and that got included in a meta-analysis also, which shows that orbital preservation can also be performed in sinonasal tumors with the help of induction chemotherapy. So what is the message we would have is, in sinonasal tumors, there is a choice that you can give induction followed by EA, especially if the resection is difficult or you want to look at organ preservation. Very near to sinonasal is the paranasal sinus. Can this be? Yeah, in technically unresectable maxillas or maxillae cancers which are resectable, but if you're want orbital preservation, that's another site where induction chemotherapy helps you out. In fact, I'll show you this very interesting series. This was an old series of TMH in which only surgery or RT or CTRT was used, and most of the patients, only 60% were stage 4, and no one was used induction chemotherapy. You could see the 3-year oral rate was 38%, and the margin positive 37. As opposed to this is our series of 41 patients, all stage 4. This is not all maxilla. This was all maxilla. So there were nearly 40% which was stage 3 and all stage 4, all had received induction chemotherapy. The margin positive rate was 0%, and we achieved similar survival as would be achieved in a cohort in which nearly 42% of patients were not stage 4. So that's the importance of induction chemotherapy in maxilla, especially when it is technically unresectable or you want to have orbital preservation. Now, is there any other site in larynx? Now, understand, in larynx and hypopharyngeal cancer, there are situations when the patient presents with stridor or impeding stridor. If you do a tracheostomy in impeding stridor, it has been shown in multiple publications that leads to bad results, and organ preservation is just out of question. So this is one site where you could be doing induction chemotherapy. And this is our own data, which shows that it is feasible and organ preservation can be done even in this site. Now, oral cancers, organ preservation, this manuscript is under review and would soon be in public domain in next I believe in next 2 or 3 months. This was led by Dr. Devendra Chokar. Interesting study in which oral cancers, those are very close to gingiva buccal sulcus, or if they're very close to from the tongue part to the gingiva sulcus, for margin, you may have to cut the mandible. When you cut the mandible, first of all, the continuity of the mandible gets lost. Second is, so cosmetically is bad. Multiple functions like chewing, swallowing become difficult once the continuity of the mandible is cut. So this idea was that if we give induction chemotherapy and tumor shrinks, we could be able to cut. We will be able to cut without cutting the bone, or we might not have to cut the bone in continuity. We'll have to do something like a marginal mandibulectomy. So in this study, half of the patients, 68 patients, half patients underwent standard treatment. So no mandible was preserved. All of the mandibles were knocked off. In the rest 34, we gave induction chemotherapy, and we could preserve the mandibles in nearly half of the patients. These are the 2-year results. I'm sorry, I couldn't put the results of the 5-year results. The publication has gone with the 5-year results, and even at the end of 5-year results, the results with induction chemotherapy are better than those with surgery. With that, I would just stop with this presentation. I actually wanted to discuss one more interesting issue which is coming up in oral cancers, and that is giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy in oral cancers, neoadjuvant immunotherapy. So I would just take another 10 minutes and then we can go to the questions and answers. And so let's look at things which we may need to just understand before we talk about immunotherapy. Now, and because of lack of time, I have focused on indications to make the students understand that when you should be offering neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And I have not covered which regimen, how many cycles, what side effects, how to manage them. We'll take that at some other time, and that is more of a practical thing which you would learn when you come for your rotations in Solid 2. Now, one of the things what hampers induction chemotherapy is that there are quite a bit of side effects which are associated with induction chemotherapy and which can be life-threatening, and a few people do lose their life. At Tata, our rates of mortality stands at 2 to 3%, but rates of mortality even in randomized studies with induction stands at around 5 to 6%. In community setting in US, it stands at around 14 to 18%. So you can understand that there is a variable side effects which are associated with giving neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Now, as opposed to that, we all know you may have used immunotherapy, checkpoint inhibitor specifically, at some part of time in your routine solid tumor practice, or even in that in hematology. And one of the things which goes with checkpoint inhibitors, mainly nivolumab and pembrolizumab specifically, is that they have limited grade 3 and 4 toxicities. They have grade 3 and 4 toxicity, but this is limited, especially when given as a single agent. This is in the range of most of the time less than 10 to 15%. They have a different kind of toxicities, but that is limited. So in the next few slides, I'm going to show you some emerging data of using immunotherapy in oral cancers, mainly in resectable oral cancers, which has started showing that this might be something in next 2 years or 3 years. The results might be coming in this with this respect. Now, in this talk, we'll be talking about PDL1. There will be two things I will talk. One is TPS and CPS. TPS is tumor, the expression of PDL1 on the tumor. CPS is combined PDL1 score, that is the expression on the tumor plus microenvironment. So CPS always has TPS in it. So if the TPS of a patient is 60%, the CPS always will be 60 or above. Now, whenever we give any systemic therapy, so the challenge remains to look at tumor response. We could see that radiological response, but the issue happens with immunotherapy that most of the time you may not see a good radiological response, but you would see a pathological response. The challenge remains that if the tumor has shrunk or if the tumor is showing changes, how to identify where the tumor was there. So for that reason, in the tumor bed, we look at whether there was atrophy, any necrosis, specifically coagulative necrosis, presence of keratin debris. In the surrounding stroma, we look at fibrosis, presence of Fumi macrophages or giant cell. If these changes are there, this is called as the area of pathological response. The pathological response is defined area of pathological response divided by a sum of area of pathological response plus viable tumors multiplied by 100. Now, till before 2017, there was no score. Dr. Upalluri from MD Anderson gave this first score, in which if this response is less than 10%, it is called PTR 0. PTR1 is called minor response, that is 10 to 49%. And the major response is PTR2, that is greater than 50%. We would be using these terms, and hence I wanted to clarify these terms because the whole story starts in 2017 with this ASCO presentation, in which patients receive only 1 dose of pembrolizumab and they get operated after that. And depending upon their pathological features, they get further treated.
Sir, are you sure? Vijay, your slides are not visible.
Oh, slides are not visible? Okay. Sorry. Oh.
You're stuck on conclusion. Slide number 84 of wo pehle wala.
Oh, actually I changed slide and spoke for nearly...
No, we thought you were just generally talking to us. Sorry.
No. Okay. So, yeah, it was. Okay, so I'll again explain the... So PDL1, when we look at TPS is with respect to what is the expression on the tumor. CPS is what is the expression on the tumor plus the surrounding microstroma. Now, that is one terminology I will be using in the next 5 to 7 minutes. Tumor response, now, as I told again, in immunotherapy, shrinkage of the tumor may not be that appreciated on radiology. And most of the times, in this resectable oral cancer situation, you do give immunotherapy and you operate within 2 or 3 weeks itself. So you may not appreciate radiological shrinkage, but you definitely appreciate pathological response. And how do you say that that is the area where there is a pathological response is by using these criteria. When for the tumor bed, you look for atrophy, you look for keratin debris, and for necrosis, you're specifically looking at coagulative necrosis. In the surrounding stroma, you look at fibrosis, you look at Fumi macrophages, and you look at presence of giant cell. Now, if you see these changes, that is called area of partial response. Now, pathological response for immunotherapy is defined as area of partial response divided by area of partial response plus viable tumor on all this is multiplied by 100. Obviously, you would get a percentage. Dr. Upalluri has classified this as no response if this is called PTR 0, if these changes are less than 10%. A minor response if these changes are seen in 10 to 49% of the tumor area, and a major response if it is set is greater than 50%. Also, sometimes that term like PTR 0, 1, and 2. Now, all starts in 2017, again with Dr. Upalluri's, Ravi Upalluri's brilliant paper, where 1 dose of neoadjuvant pembrolizumab is given, followed by surgery. Original margins are used. And after that, patient is treated according to the treatment. If the patient had extracapsular extension of margin, which you would say high risk, they also receive maintenance pembrolizumab. What were the observations? A small study, no doubt, but it's clearly showed there was no delay in surgery. there was no major complications. And there was a brilliant clinical efficacy in the limited time. So if you look at operable head and neck cancers, this is from the T0 study. All are T1, T2 patients. You would see that the 5-year survival stands around 70%. And if you look for locally advanced cancers, you could see that 1 year survival itself stands around 40%. By 2 years, this comes down to 30%. So we may try to call these a curable tumors, but locally advanced or even resectable oral cancers don't have very brilliant survivals. So with that respect, when you see that in this study, 1 year follow-up after surgery in all patients didn't have a single local recurrence, it was considered very interesting. And pathological response, that is major pathology, was seen in nearly 42% of the patients. And this obviously was with respect to the PD-L1 expression. Higher the PD-L1 expression, you could see better response. And obviously a limited study of 24 patients, limited conclusions, but it did show that this might be something we would be looking in future when neoadjuvant pembrolizumab or ipilimumab would be used. We don't get anything till 2019, but in 2019, we get this another publication where we have neoadjuvant nivolumab given 2 weekly, but this time 3 cycles are given. Again, patients who don't respond undergo surgery, but those who are responding, they get another cycle and then they undergo surgery. And what was interesting is this time, because of the multiple number of cycles, we see a change in tumor size also with 44% response rates and a similar amount of pathological response. Another thing which came in the same time, in the same setting was, we up till now talk about giving a single agent. So pembrolizumab 1 dose, nivolumab multiple dose, and getting a response and nearly around 50% major responses. Now we talk about giving, in this study, there was 2 things which were done. Either you only nivolumab monotherapy or nivolumab plus ipilimumab, and the doses were limited. That is 1 dose. And after that, you take them for treatment. It was seen that when you do nivolumab alone, single dose, the pathological response rates are not great, 17%. But when you give it nivo with ipi, it stands at 50%. So what knowledge we have gathered up till now is, if you give 1 dose of pembro, you might get some responses up to 44%. 1 dose of nivolumab, major response is up to 17%. Multiple dose of nivolumab, major response is up to 44%. And this was an interesting presentation which came in this year's ASCO about pembrolizumab neoadjuvant from the University of Cincinnati. They again get only 1 dose of pembrolizumab and then they treated patient according to standard. There is an interesting thing what was observed with this 1 dose itself. And now we are talking about a higher number of patients where we are now looking at around 76 patients which were treated, as opposed to Ravi Uppali's initial publication presentation only 24 patients. What it did show is when we gave a single dose of pembrolizumab, when you compared this with the histological RTOG results, the high risk survival remained similar. But in the intermediate risk, there was a massive jump in survival which was seen. Now, you may say that this is a single-arm study. We should not be considering those results that much with seriousness. But understand the jump was so massive that it actually estimates were higher than the upper bound of 95% confidence interval, which means that you need to consider these results a bit seriously. But it did show that there is a chance that giving a single dose of pembrolizumab would lead to a disease-free survival advantage, especially in intermediate risk cancers, which would be as used as a jump of nearly 25 to 28%. Now, another thing which was shown is that if you had a major response, or we did better than having no response at all. Now, all this was with a single dose of pembrolizumab, and we could see that the major response here was in the terms of around 30%. We knew that in Ravi Uppali it was, and all responses were 42%. The single was again around this term. Now let's look at Ravindra Uppali's second paper, which was discussed in ASCO, and this was a follow-up to that of the first study. In the first study, in 2017, only 1 dose of pembro was given in resectable head and neck cancer. The second study, 2 doses of pembro was given in this, and let's see what changes we are seeing. The PTR2, I told you there was 44% response. That was because both PTR1 and PTR2 were taken together. In the cohort 2, the PTR2 itself was 42.9%. again, when you look with respect to pathological risk factors, a decrement in positive margin, decrement in external oral extension with just 2 cycles was huge. And initially, this high risk you see from 50% decreased to 17.9%, which means that tumor responded and the external oral extension decrease and the positive margins decrease. And this also led to some amount of stage migration, where patients which were locally advanced led to more going in stage 3 and stage 1 and 2. What I mean by locally advanced, majorly stage 4 in this situation. And as opposed to the initial graph where I had showed you by 2 to 3 years, most of the median survivals are reached. In our OCAT study, the median survivals were again in the range of 18 to 20 months in the high-risk population especially, and even in the intermediates was 20 to 28 months. This is exciting results where you are seeing very minimal patients having events with giving pembrolizumab. So I just wanted to give this as a 10-minute extra because this is something where I think in resectable oral cancers, in near future, we are going to see multiple studies which are already ongoing, like the Keynote 689, which randomizes the patient to 2 cycles of pembrolizumab followed by surgery. The IMSTAR study, which is a German study, which looks at nivolumab followed by surgery. We may be out for an exciting time in head and neck cancer, where especially in oral cancers, where you may see that induction with neoadjuvant immunotherapy becomes a standard of care and may lead to an improvement, massive improvement. I won't say just minimal, but massive improvements in DFS and overall survival. Can this be in India? I think this neoadjuvant concept of immunotherapy might be very well applicable in India. This is an unpublished data of TPS. I just collected this and did this for this tumor. When you look at TPS per se, TPS 0, which is no positive, is seen only in 11.43% of patients. There is a catch here. These are not affluent patients. These are recurrent or metastatic patients of head and neck cancer. I have excluded the other. I've shown you the oral cancer data who post-treatment we come for palliative treatment. This is the TPS done in them. Not all patients, those who are willing to take immunotherapy, but it's a huge data which we have, but it shows that nearly 90% of our patients have TPS positivity in oral cancer, with TPS greater than 50 seen in nearly 1/3 of cases. And this is higher than what is seen in the Western population. So likely this time that we may have more benefit. I'll just give you one example. In this patient, some low dose of immunotherapy was given for this patient, and this was given as palliative treatment to this patient. This was a huge tumor, which was considered unresectable. You could see the response this patient had with this, and you could see this is 80 to 90% TPS PD-L1, and you could see that a viable tumor was only 4%. So this was a major response. The patient is still doing well. So I would just say on this topic of resectable oral cancer, neoadjuvant immuno shows promise. Routine at present, probably no. You may probably individualize it for a neoadjuvant in a frail patient who may not tolerate TPS. What we know up till now, it looks very promising. Looks like it may improve DFS and overall support, especially in the intermediate risk. It may have a role in organ preservation, and we saw that the margin negative rate, the ENE rates decrease with giving neoadjuvant immunotherapy. There is definitely no impact with respect to increase in post-operative adverse event. It does not decrease the time to surgery. It's well tolerated. And if you do more than 1 cycle, it's better. Or a combination of immunotherapy, it's better. With that, I would just say thank you and sorry for diverging from the topic, but I thought that this is something which our students should know, that this is just something which is around the block and may just come up in why our first years become a third years. Yeah, thank you. And if there are any questions, I will take it. So, Jaya Ghosh, madam, in nasopharynx, which NaCT, TPF or Gemcite plus cisplatin? Madam, in TMH, we have been using TPF regimen as an institute policy. So unless we have shortage of beds, or if the patient cannot afford, we go with TPF, or else we go with gemcitabine plus cisplatin. Do we have a study comparing these two regimens? Yes, and in fact, this is something interesting we must know about Sanyat University. Sanyat University is in China, and I've never seen a single university giving multiple ASCO orals in the same cancer in the same setting. Sanyat University gave 2 to 3 orals in one ASCO. I think it was 2019. when they talked about GemCis as induction, TPF as induction, and CF as induction. All three studies ran at the same time in the same university, Saniat University. And Saniat University is doing a 18-1 protocol where there are 8 arms with different induction regimens which they have tried already. And time will definitely tell us the way Saniat, because I may not be surprised that they come out next year or in fact this year's ASCO of 22 with those results, because their studies you could do faster.
Linga, is it similar outcome? Sorry, with GemCis versus TPF?
So we don't know, madam, whether head-to-head we don't have comparison, but definitely when we look with respect to cross-12 comparison, it looks to have similar outcomes.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
So larynx preservation studies like arteria, did they have a baseline and follow-up larynx? No, Lingaraj, they didn't have any larynx function assessment plan in the protocol. The now post 2009-10, whichever larynx preservation protocols have been launched, they have this where you look for larynx function as an important aspect, and that's the reason why the tracheostomy versus tracheostomy versus esophageal dysfunction as one of the event in this. Cetuximab as radiation. Okay, so if the patient you are selecting is going for chemo radiation upfront, I would say cisplatin as a radiosensitizer, and this is again extrapolated data from an RTOG study in which HPV positive oropharyngeal cancers, which were considered as low to intermediate risk, were treated with cetuximab plus RT versus cisplatin plus RT. Cisplatin plus RT had a survival advantage over cetuximab plus RT. So this is an extrapolation of data from the oropharyngeal HPV patient, which I would be doing on laryngeal preservation. So I would stick with cisplatin plus RT if you are treating upfront. But there's a catch here. If you are selected as paradigm in which you would be given neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by CTRT. In that study, we have a French study called Tramplin, which has shown that if you give induction chemotherapy followed by cisplatin plus RT versus cetuximab plus RT, results are similar, but cisplatin, because the cumulative doses becomes too much, leads to end organ damage, especially renal dysfunction. And that was one of the conclusion of the Tramplin study, got published in Journal of Clinical Oncology, which suggested that if you have used induction chemotherapy, especially for larynx preservation, it's better. You are better off using cetuximab as the radiosensitizer. Lingaraj, 1 to 2 IO alone leading to such benefits. What could be the proposed mechanism? Frankly, Lingaraj, I have no idea what would be the proposed mechanism of why 1 or 2 doses of IO given just before so NSCT would lead to such huge benefits. But what is seen definitely is this is consistent across multiple sites. I have seen results with respect to lung cancer, multiple studies in oral cancer. I will ask Kumar sir. Sir, would you like to take this question? Why 1 or 2 doses of IO in NSCT setting in resectable disease are showing such high benefits?
So I think so. Your initial statement was the most important one, that really speaking we don't know, but this is seen in many tumors, not really here. This has been tried in lung also, and it appears a section of patients they behave totally differently as compared to others in these patients. So looks like it does happen. It happens recurrently. So looks like a real phenomenon. But why? That is a tough question.
So Nandini's question is neoadjuvant selection based on biomarker, any cutoff for PD-L1. So up till now, the studies which have used Nandini, they have not bio-selected patients for this. They have been giving it in all comers, but there are good trends which are coming from already published studies that patients who have a high PD-L1 expression, they benefit. But reverse is also true, that if the patient does not have PD-L1, it does not mean that he may not benefit. So cutoffs have not come up for PD-L1. We have for neoadjuvant. We have cutoffs for palliative, but not for neoadjuvant immunotherapy. I think cutoff development will start once we have phase 3 studies showing that there is a benefit, which gets, and after that, I think we may have publications coming up for how this cutoffs be developed. Lingaraj, is it HPV making more? No, Lingaraj, this is interesting. And I always felt that this is where Western people are more smarter than us, and they gang up, all come together when it's required. So if you see all studies with respect to CTRT or neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you would see that more than 50 to 60% of the patients are oropharynx. And obviously, because there is HPV is high, out of nearly 70 to 80% will be HPV. But for resectable, all resectable series which I've shown you, it's surprise, but 80% of the patients predominantly were oral cancers. And that's the reason why I feel that these results of immunotherapy will be more applicable to India as opposed to the data coming with oropharynx HPV predominant patients. No, in resectable neoadjuvant, in resectable head and neck cancer, the predominant patients which have been taken is oral cancers. So I don't think it is HPV or immunogenic. So Akhil has, yes, Akhil, in urinary bladder also we have similar data where neoadjuvant immunotherapy has shown to be beneficial. Jaya madam asks whether large tumors, lot of neoantigens. I like to believe that larger tumors, a lot of neoantigens will lead to better, because in India, nearly, at least for oral cancers and head and neck cancer, most of the patients are locally advanced. So if that is there, it would be better. But resectable, no, they yeah, oropharynx not much included, Lingaraj, in this series, because very few patients, because oropharynx advanced and then resectable with it becomes a tough. So in this they have included mainly oral cancers, hypopharynx or larynx, which could undergo resection. Any other question?
No, sir. What I was referring is that about large tumors and a lot of antigens, because these are resectable tumors. So I don't know whether there's that large to give a lot of new tumor antigens.
We are also talking about neoadjuvant, Lingaraj. So
yes. No.
So that may be, I'll give a corollary to this. This is with respect to the results which are coming glioma. Glioma, we already have negative results with respect to immunotherapy coming as an adjuvant. Both, but there was an interesting paper which came in 2020 in the early quarters in Nature, which shows that with 35 patients, a single dose of pembrolizumab showed good pathological changes, and with respect to historical control was better. And one of the reasons which they gave was that for immunotherapy to act, at least for glioma, you would need an antigen, neoantigen or antigen to be present there, or that the tumor to be there, and that's what they have postulated. That's the reason why probably neoadjuvant in glioma, that's it, may do more beneficial than the negative studies which have come up in the adjuvant setting. But I really don't know the answer, but these are all postulates. But whatever it seems that the way IO are coming up, at least in head and neck cancer, I'm very hopeful that they would become the standard of care in very near future with much better improvement in outcomes. I was waiting for some questions with respect to neoadjuvant chemotherapy in other sites. The discussion has been completely taken over by IO related questions. That was a small part. Any student has any question with the neoadjuvant chemotherapy in head and neck cancer? Even unrelated to what we have discussed, it's okay.
Sir, in adjuvant CTRT cisplatin ineligible patients, concurrent chemo, which we can offer.
Okay, so if in adjuvant CTRT, if the patient, let's take two scenarios here. The first scenario would be patient has received neoadjuvant chemotherapy and you find that the patient is unfit for CTRT, which may be unfit for concurrent cisplatin during the adjuvant setting, whichever may be the reason. And I'll take a scenario in which you find a patient upfront itself. So first scenario of neoadjuvant, and then the patient is found to be implant. So we don't have very good data sets here, but what has been done in the Paradigm study or in the TAX-323 is that in this patient, carboplatins have been given. In some studies, docetaxel also has been given. So with the post-induction, these are the regimens which have been used if the patients were not considered to be not fit for in adjuvant setting. If you are talking about a patient in adjuvant CTRT who is upfront cisplatin ineligible, he has not received any previous chemotherapy, he has undergone surgery, and you find that he needs CTRT, but he is cisplatin unfit. In that scenario, I think the a lot of evidence actually goes towards using docetaxel regimen according to RTOG 0234 or extrapolating data of carboplatin 5-FU from the radical settings of GOTEC studies. These are the two choices I would like to keep first if the patient is fit. If they are not fit for this, then would consider for any other regimen. Mishra has a question. Is there a difference or response seen with neoadjuvant chemotherapy seen as per tobacco habits? That's a very interesting question, sir. I have not seen, I don't know about neoadjuvant chemotherapy because in our database, nearly 95 to 97% of the patients have tobacco habits. So I can't tell you about neoadjuvant chemotherapy. What I can tell you is that there is a good literature which suggests that if there is higher tobacco habits, there is higher expression of PD-L1. And with that, it seems that yes, if the population has a good tobacco use, we may have a higher PD-L1 expression. That is what is seen in a few papers which are there, but I don't have very hardcore data where people have dissected according to tobacco habits. But it's a good thing. I would look at our database if we can do analysis of that sort. Shashwat question is, any capping a dose of cisplatin in patient receiving NACT receiving CTRT? So there's no such cap, Shashwat. What we have seen is that, and that when you give 2 to 3 cycles of cisplatin in neoadjuvant chemotherapy, you land up on a cumulative dose of 150 to 225 milligram per meter square. We normally give 30 milligram per cisplatin in this patient's post-surgery, and around 6 cycles are received. That comes out to be 180. So we try to tend to restrict out to 400 milligram per meter square of cisplatin. Does this cause some amount of renal damage? Yeah, we have a analysis to that, and it's published also that it does cause some amount of renal damage. Around in surviving patients, 6% of patients leads to a grade 3 renal dysfunction. So it's a good idea to cap cisplatin, according to me, before 400 milligram per meter square. After that, the side effect starts increasing drastically. If there are no other questions, thank you. Kumar sir, you can start with the routine meeting, sir.